Hello, and welcome to the Scope of Things podcast, a no-nonsense look at the promise and problems of clinical research based on a sweep of the latest news and emerging trends in the field and what I think is worthy of your 30 or so minutes of time. I'm Deborah Borfitz, Senior Science Writer for Clinical Research News, which means I spend a lot of time with my ear to the ground on your behalf and a lot of hours every week speaking to top experts from around the world. Please consider making this your trusted go-to channel for staying current on things that matter, whether they give us hope or cause for pause. In another 5 minutes or so, I'll be talking with Briony Swire-Thompson, a cognitive psychologist and director of the Psychology of Misinformation Lab at Northeastern University Network Science Institute, about the current epidemic of misinformation and how clinical trial sponsors and sites might best deal with it. But first, the latest news, including a precision medicine initiative in Sweden integrating research with healthcare, newly available cardiometabolic clinical data registries for real-world evidence projects, updates to guidelines on the reporting of clinical trials, using AI to improve the monitoring of movement disorders, and the best yet biomarker of stroke and dementia risk. Scientists in Sweden have cast the vision for an initiative that aims to integrate research with healthcare to enable precision medicine on a national scale. Precision Omics Initiative Sweden, or PROMIS, will create a database where researchers can track individuals using molecular analysis or biobank specimens together with clinical data documenting changes to their health status, as well as build feedback loops between discoveries and clinicians at the point of care. On the clinical research side, the imagined possibilities include prospective intervention studies for testing novel biomarkers in cancer, new ways of conducting population screening, drug trials where participants are selected based on their omics profile, and registry-based randomized clinical trials. But one of the key features of PROMIS is a platform recruiting trial participants and returning results, including clinically relevant genetic findings, for example, in rare diseases, pharmacogenomics, and as polygenetic risk scores for complex traits. Veradigm, formerly Allscripts, a longtime electronic health record supplier for ambulatory care providers, recently created 7 cardiometabolic clinical data registries containing all the relevant details for understanding the burden of illness, disease pathways, and the length and type of treatments, as well as their effect on different clinical measures. Critical ingredients were real-world evidence projects. The data sets were sourced through a collaboration with the American College of Cardiology and integrate disease-level data from over 80 distinct EHR technology platforms. Veradigm presents data-providing practices with relevant research opportunities, as well as access to the research-ready EHR database for patient recruitment and data collection purposes. Study sponsors can also tap the integrated data sets, but the long-term hope is that they will rely on Veradigm to build the data pipes for information flow, so they no longer need to build an electronic data capture system to collect and manage trial data. The Consolidated Standards of Reporting Trials, or CONSORT as they're called, these guidelines have a new set of updates that, among other things, encourages researchers to add 4 new checklist items. These include indicating patient and public involvement in the design, conduct, and reporting of the trial, where and how the data can be accessed, how harms, such as unwanted effects of an intervention, were defined and assessed, and how the intervention and comparator were administered, and details of the associated care received during the trial. The original CONSORT statement came out in 1996 and has had 2 prior updates. The same international team of researchers behind the CONSORT updates also just revisited what's known as the Standard Protocol Items Recommendations for Interventional Trials, or SPIRIT statement, to align reporting in both checklists and provide users with consistent guidance. A researcher at the University of Florida has developed an open-source computer program dubbed VisionMD, which uses artificial intelligence to analyze videos of patients with Parkinson's disease and other movement disorders. The tool is designed to help doctors more accurately monitor subtle motor changes, which could not only improve patient care, but also advance clinical research. The software is intended to address the potential risk of inconsistency and subjectivity in traditional clinical assessments and deliver results with just a few clicks. VisionMD analyzes standard videos and automatically extracts precise motion metrics and runs entirely on local computers to ensure data privacy. It is already being used by researchers in Germany, Spain, and Italy. And finally, a multidisciplinary team of investigators has identified the best yet biomarker of stroke and dementia risk, impaired ability of the heart's left atrium to stretch, or what's called left atrial reservoir strain, even in people who aren't also experiencing atrial fibrillation, or AFib. The biomarker characterizes a condition known as left atrial myopathy, which is indicated by abnormal changes visible on an electrocardiogram, or ECG, which could now be used for post hoc secondary analysis of data from earlier failed treatment trials of blood thinners in people with a condition where function of their left atrium was overlooked during enrollment. In an upcoming trial, investigators say they will use the left atrial reservoir strain marker to enroll people and determine whether blood thinners can prevent stroke and dementia in individuals who have previously had an embolic stroke of undetermined source. It is hoped that the biomarker will one day be a standard metric on ECG reports everywhere. As a reminder, links to the various articles and studies referred to in this news segment can be found in the show notes. I am very pleased to have on the show today a guest who can speak authoritatively to the timely topic of health misinformation and misplaced trust, including why it exists and what can be done about it. Briony Swire-Thompson is professor of psychology and political science at Northeastern University's Network Science Institute, as well as director of its Psychology of Misinformation Lab. And she has agreed to field a few questions on the mind of everyone working in one corner of healthcare or another. Welcome to the show, Briony.
Thanks very much for having me.
Okay, so for the benefit of listeners, I want to start off with a quick clarification of the difference between misinformation, the main topic of today's conversation, and disinformation, which refers to intentional efforts to mislead. Briony, is it safe to assume, as I have, that misinformation is the more prevalent problem out there right now, or are more sinister things happening that we need to be addressing, at least when it comes to exchanges happening on social media about healthcare and clinical trials, the companies behind them, and the people conducting research studies?
Yeah, as a misinformation researcher, I'm certainly biased, but I consider misinformation to be, an extremely big problem at the moment. And as far as clinical trials go, they're some of the best tools that we have at creating knowledge, particularly the independently funded clinical trials, and they really are the gold standard. So I'm not aware of any studies that look specifically at clinical trial misinformation, but it's really easy to see how people could make a claim online that a clinical trial has been conducted when it hasn't, or place a certain spin on the findings, for example.
Yeah. Well, since you've been tackling this misinformation beast for quite a few years now, would you say the situation in general has grown? It sounds like you're going to say this, but I'm just going to verify. Has grown worse over time, or are we simply talking about it more now? I mean, that could be part of the issue also. And if it is indeed worse, as it seems to me, and probably you, what are the main drivers? And are any of them specific to the way clinical research gets done or talked about, do you think?
Yeah, it certainly feels like it's worse. It's actually a problem that's really difficult to measure. So we're not really sure whether the problem's changed over time, whether it's better or worse than previously. There are a few unique issues that have certainly developed or become worse over time. And one of them is one of the ways that clinical trial misinformation could spread. And that's through something called predatory journals. So these are journals that accept publications for monetary gain, but they don't perform any of the usual checks for academic quality. So essentially, they just appear to be legitimate journals, but they don't employ any of the underlying editorial or peer review processes to minimize the publication of misinformation and disinformation. So people who would publish in these journals for some kind of their own gain, maybe for financial gain or reputation. And the real issue here is that if a user were to search, say, Google Scholar or PubMed, results from these fake clinical trials could be published in these fake journals, and the potential for the impact on, I guess, the scientific information ecosystem is huge.
You said fake journals. I mean, you're really talking about a journal that doesn't exist or one that's not legitimate. I make sure I understand.
They are essentially websites that appear. They kind of have all like these kind of what we call these trust cues. They have they have a journal name. They have what appears to be an editorial board. There's a lot of different, I guess, levels of quality of predatory journals. Some are just, like knocked together websites, and some appear to be very, very well done. And they often have a name that is very similar to a legitimate journal, but they essentially act purely for profit. And yeah, they're essentially just kind of co-opting this kind of the open access framework of journals, because it's very common these days to pay for researchers to pay to get their knowledge out there for open access for all. But these predatory journals essentially just take that money and they publish whatever comes their way.
Well, do you know how many of these kind of predatory journals are out there, or how often do you run across them? Just give me some sense of just how big of a problem is this?
Absolutely massive. I would have to look at the numbers, but I think there's more predatory journals now than legitimate journals online. It's just the problem's huge. There are many indicators. For example, like maybe the journal says that it's the European Journal of Medicine, but it's actually, you can tell it's hosted in a different country outside of Europe, for example.
Wow, that's interesting. Do you happen to know, because I am in the media also, do journalists get confused by this as well? Are they misled?
I think I think journalists, I even think the scientists themselves, one reason they found for publishing in predatory journals is some people just can't tell the difference. If this isn't your field, if you're publishing outside your field, for junior scholars, for scholars in third world countries, sometimes it can be really difficult to tell these apart from legitimate journals.
Wow. Okay, I want to get into some of the whats and whys here. I know you've done research on what drives belief in inaccurate information, as well as why people share misinformation online. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who could use answers to those two questions. So what do you say about the what and the why of all this?
Yeah, I think, well, one reason is that essentially people don't have enough time, cognitive resources, or even motivation to fact check everything that comes our way, where we have a huge amount of information at the moment, both online and offline, and it can take a really long time to determine if something's true or false. So we often just use, trusted sources as these heuristics or shortcuts. But yeah, as for why individuals share things online, a lot of people think that if we share something online, people must believe it to be true. But there's a lot of reasons people could share things. Maybe they think it's funny, or it will create discussion or something. So there's a lot of reason why people share things online. But also, yeah, I just want to highlight the huge amount of information that everyone is dealing with.
Yeah. And you said one thing that I really want to ask you about that's real important to me, because I will always say I have to find a trusted source and stick with it and know that it's a trusted source that doesn't steer me wrong. But it sounds like people are trusting maybe in the wrong sources. Is that your point? Or isn't it important to find a trusted source of information?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's I think journalists are often ahead of the game here with like looking at the source. Who's the source? Is the source credible? And checking whether or not that source has any kind of vested interest is so important.
Are you enjoying the conversation? We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to the podcast and give us a rating. It helps other people find and join the conversation. If you've got speaker or topic ideas, we'd love to hear those too. You can send them in a podcast review.
I know that you've also investigated how corrections to misinformation can be designed to maximize impact. Can you maybe elaborate on some of your key findings here as to the how-tos? I guess they've been a subject of considerable debate, even though everybody's trying to fix the same problem. There seems to be debate about how do you go about this correctly.
Yeah, no, this is something that we've looked quite a lot into. And one of the good pieces of news is it really doesn't matter in terms of format, in terms of how you correct the misinformation. As long as you have a really clear, what we call a false tag, as long as it's very salient that the piece of information is false, it's highly effective. I mean, for example, you shouldn't have the piece of misinformation just in the headline and then the correction far below in small print. You should always make it like very, very clear that the information is false. But a lot of people initially thought that there was something called the truth sandwich. So this is where you present true information followed by the false information and then followed by true information again. And we find that that is absolutely no better than just a straight up, very clear, like almost naturally how you think the correction should be best framed. And that's really nice because sometimes if people did think that that was effective, you'd end up with these very tortured kind of corrections. You could tell people just like squeezing into a format that doesn't really fit it. We've also done a lot of research into this concept called the backfire effect. So this is when you correct misinformation. People initially thought that could make people believe even more in the very misconception that the correction was attempting to correct. And we find absolutely no evidence for this. So corrections on the whole certainly reduce belief, regardless of how you correct it. So we find it, corrections are great. They're wonderful tools. There are some things you can do to maximize the impact. One is repeating it. It's really interesting how often we find that the reason people have what we call belief regression. So you correct it, people update their belief, and then they re-believe in the misinformation because they forget that you told them that was false. They think that this is still true information. So repeating corrections is fantastic. And as I said before, sources, highlighting the source, highlighting that it's a trusted source and why is really effective as well.
Very good. Yeah, you certainly have the false information being repeated a lot. So it makes a lot of sense to repeat the corrected information as well to sort of counter that it's a battle of sorts.
For sure.
Okay. I want to also ask you about this Stand Up for Science movement that's underway, which recently culminated in protest marches nationwide, largely in response to the Trump administration's actions that are viewed by some as a threat to scientific progress. What are your thoughts on this sort of tactic and the wisdom of life science companies and clinical investigators engaging in public protests to counter misinformation about science?
Yeah, I think it's good to stand up for science in any way people can. And I think it depends on your platform and what you're able to do there. But I think certainly it's a good thing. People should be standing up for science at this point in time.
Is there any success stories to point to here? Or is this just so new of a problem that who knows?
Not to my knowledge.
Let me ask you one final question then. What proactive steps would you advise life science companies and academic institutions to take as clinical trial sponsors, which would help mitigate misinformation about medical research wherever that misinformation may be circulating?
I think similar to the standing up for science where you can, I think doing good science where you can, having clear reporting where you can are essential. So, results of clinical trials should be really clearly written so anyone can understand. Fostering trust by labeling like any vested interest is important. And, also I think for the journalists reporting on these, to make really clear reporting of the findings and also the pitfalls. We find that it actually increases trust when individuals write about science in a nuanced way to mention like the pros and cons of the studies. And also, as I said, curbing predatory journals is always a good thing. I work a lot in cancer misinformation, and this is an area that is particularly prone to misinformation due to the significant financial incentives and abundance of disinformation sources. And it's a topic that causes great harm. So I think all these clear reporting and discussions of clinical trial can only be beneficial in this space.
Absolutely. Briony, it has been a real treat to have you on the show to discuss one of my favorite topics. And I truly hope some of the sort of psychological tactics, essentially, that you shared today find some followers and, dare I hope, go viral. Thanks for your efforts to keep us all on the right track. And thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And as always, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening in. If you're not subscribed to this podcast yet, please consider going to Apple Podcasts and doing so right now so you don't miss your monthly dose of news and perspectives you'll be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. And if you're up for it, I'd also be so very grateful if you'd leave a rating and review while you're there. For more straight talk on studies involving humans, visit clinicalresearchnewsonline.com. And if you're a clinical research professional, we hope also to see you at our next SCOPE conference, where we make things happen. Bye for now.